Well, hello again, and welcome to our thought for today. I am sure that you have one of these. Of course you do. They are very much part and parcel of our modern life. And really, what you can do with a modern iPhone is truly remarkable. For as long as you've got conductivity to your server provider, you can pretty much contact anyone in most parts of the world. That is, of course, until your battery begins to run low and you get that warning sign, low battery. I must admit that this phone is getting on a bit in years. I remember when I first bought it, the battery seemed to keep its charge for a long time. But these days, however, it never seems to be off the charger. I think it is trying to tell me something. And you know, a sad thing, our spiritual lives can be a bit like that. Maybe through time, the promises of God can seem to lose their power and their significance within our lives. Why might that be? Is it because God himself has become small in our eyes? Yes, we might be able to recite God's promises with chapter and verse, but are there circumstances in our lives that have caused us to lose the reality of the power and the majesty of God? Does he truly remain our King? Do you remember that King? That King who conquers armies, who cuts a valley through a sea. The shepherd who seeks his sheep, who keeps them safe behind his staff. The Lord who walks on waves and calls the dead back from a grave. Yet slowly, subtly, we can forget God's power and God's wisdom and God's tenderness. You know, when the promises of God seem powerless to quieten our fears or soothe our grief or lift our worries or even motivate our obedience, we need to do more than simply hear those promises again. We need again to behold the God who actually gave them. If we look at Isaiah chapter 40, we find the prophet speaks to a group of broken Israelites. You see, Israel, that nation that once shone like the stars of the sky, has now been blackened and taken into exile. As Israel looks back from Babylon, the promises of God seem to be buried and very distant. How could God give Israel an everlasting kingdom when they were slaves in a foreign land? How could God make Israel a blessing to the world when a curse seemed to have fallen on them? And how could God raise up from Israel a serpent-crushing king when they were all under Babylon's heel? And you know, it is so easy to ask similar questions when we remember God's promises, maybe from the wreckage of our own circumstances. And we can look back at a devastating failure and ask, how can God forgive me? Or we can look up from the creator of some loss and ask, how can God comfort me? In those moments, we need God to do what he did for Israel. We need him to come alongside us, remind us of his promises, and then say, behold your God. Isaiah 40, verse 9. Well, who is the God who gives his promises to us? Well, he is the God of might who created the world by his word. He is a God of wisdom who makes a way in the wilderness. And he is a God of tenderness who carries his children home. And you know, he is bigger than all our problems. Behold, the Lord comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Verse 10. Behold, the God of might who created the world by his word. The God who speaks his promises is the same God who said, let there be light, and the darkness fled. When God speaks, stars burn, planets lock into orbit, rivers run, oceans fill earth's floors, valleys sink and mountains race to the sky. The grass in all the world may wither, and the flower on every hillside fade. But the word of him who made them will stay and will stand forever. Verse 8. So are your troubles as untamed as the oceans? Well, God can hold them in the hollow of his hand. Verse 12. Are your sorrows as vast as the heavens? Well, God measures them like a carpenter at his workbench. Are your burdens as heavy as the hills? Well, God can pick them up and put them on his scales. Verse 12. You know, the Israelites thought that their future as a nation had fallen along with Jerusalem's walls, and that not even God could put them back together again. But Israel's exile had not taken God by surprise, nor had he cast them from his sight. And Isaiah was to ask, have you not heard? Have you not known? The Lord is the everlasting Lord. His understanding is unsearchable. Verse 28. When Israel was lost in the wilderness of exile and saw no way home, God was already paving a highway through the desert. Verse 3. And you know, no trouble is too tangled for God to untie, and no path is too twisted for him to straighten. And no heart is too shattered for him to gather up and put back together. Yes, your problems may be bewildering, but your God is wise. He sees you. He knows every detail of your trouble. And he knows how to come alongside you as you wait for him, and he will rise up with wings like eagles. Verse 31. So what can we take from this? If God's might shows us that he is powerful to fulfill his promises, and that his wisdom convinces us that our circumstances are no exception, then his tenderness assures us that he delights to use all his might and all his wisdom in love for a weak people like you and me. Remember, God is the shepherd, the one who leaves the 99 to find his lost and wandering one. And when he finds them, he bends down, he gathers them up in his arms, and he carries them all the way home. Verse 11. You know, it was 700 years after Isaiah told Israel to behold their God. There was a man called John the Baptist who would again pick up those very words of the prophet and preach them in a Judean wilderness. He would again say, every valley will be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God. And then the remarkable thing is, John would step aside as a man walked through those valleys, those hills, and made his way through that wilderness. And he was a man of might who had bound hell's armies and brought heaven's kingdom in. And he was a man of wisdom who silenced the scribes, and he spoke the very words of God. He was a man of tenderness who healed the sick and heralded God's favour. And then he lay down beneath our problems and allowed himself to be beaten, to be bludgeoned, to be pierced and buried. But only so he could carry our curse to the grave and sink it deep into the ground and then rise up in power to an indestructible life. Yes, our problems may be big, perhaps even bigger than we may know. But your God is bigger, and his promises to you are stronger and surer. So even today, look up from your problems. Listen again to God's powerful, wise, and tender voice. And then ask God to help you behold him. To behold him. God bless.